Engage impulse engines. Engage.
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 Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage.
Engage.
Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage.
Captain.
Engage emergency override.
Engage.
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 Engage forward shields, 35%.
Engage.
Engage the cloaking device.
Engage.
Of them. Engage them in conversation.
Engage. Engage.
Al-Aqsa protests in Engulf world. Watch this space. From Aram Online, Palestinians hold the Palestinian national flag and the flag of Hamas militant group during a protest by the Dome of Rock at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in the old city of Al-Quds during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, Friday, April 7th, 2023. The Zionist military has struck targets in the Gaza Strip. From Palestine Chronicle, Jordanians hold massive rally in condemnation of Zionist aggression on Al-Aqsa Mosque. A massive rally was staged in the Jordanian capital Amman on Friday in condemnation of the Zionist aggression on Al-Aqsa Mosque and Palestine worshippers in Al-Quds, Palestinian media reported. Hundreds of people took part in the popular rally, which was organized in support of worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque and the two active Muslim groups who maintained their presence at the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex to confront provocative visits by Jewish extremists known as Murabitin, male prosecutors of the mosque, and Murabitat, female prosecutors of the mosque. Prosecutors carried the Jordanian and Palestinian flags as well as banners expressing solidarity, or protesters carried the Jordanian and Palestinian flags as well as banners expressing solidarity with Palestinians in Al-Quds and condemnation of the Zionist occupations against them. Protesters called on the international community to intervene and provide protection to the Palestinian people and to take a firm stance against the Zionist aggression on Muslim and Christian holy sites in the occupied city of Al-Quds. From Samadun, Defend Al-Aqsa, Defend Jerusalem, Defend Palestine. Protests and actions around the world. On 4th and 5th of April, the scenes of Zionist occupation forces invading Al-Aqsa Mosque during the holy month of Ramadan and brutally attacking Palestinian worshippers were displayed around the world and on video. The beatings, the mass arrests, the vicious assaults on Palestinians gathering in the mosque or in prayer once again exposed the reality of the Zionist colonial project in Palestine. that of the most vicious colonial assault that aims to strip the land identity and holy sites away from the Palestinian and Arab people in order to make way for an invasion by a few fanatical settlers for a few hours later. In the attack on Al-Aqsa, hundreds of Palestinians were forced to the ground, tied and subjected to mass arrest. Once again, arrest, imprisonment, detention, and interrogation were clearly colonial tools used in an attempt to suppress the Palestinian people in their resistance. In fact, many of these had been beaten, injured during the assault on the mosque amid the holy month, when tens of thousands gather every night to worship together. The open brutality of the assault and its clear direction for the interests of the most fanatical sector of the Zionist regime, that represented by Itamar ben Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, and their constituents in the Hilltop Youth, sparked outrage around the world, first and most profoundly the outrage by Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, part of 75 years of struggle against Zionist colonialism, occupation, and apartheid. While this new assault, keenly recognized as an attempt to confiscate holy sites and attack even the celebration of Ramadan by the occupier, and by progressive forces around the world standing with the Palestinian people. However, even many of the very imperialist states and officials that routinely defend Israel or the Zionist entity colonialism and continue to sell its weapons, provide it with aid, and give it a privileged status in trade, were compelled to issue statements of condemnation. The reality was all too clear and the outrage too great. The attacks on Al-Aqsa Mosque are an attack on the Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim identity of the holy site, as well as an attack on the identity of Al-Quds. Palestinians in Al-Quds are subjected to ongoing campaigns of ethnic cleansing, forced displacement, mass arrests, and attempt to strip them of their residency in their own home city. Jerusalem, or Al-Quds, has been illegally annexed by the settler colonial project, the same future it envisions for the entire West Bank of occupied Palestine. During this time, the Palestinian and Lebanese resistance have made clear, verbally and in action, their commitment to the defense of Al-Aqsa and Jerusalem, and all of Palestine from the river to the sea. The strength of the Palestinian people and their resistance in all of its forms inside and outside Palestine is on full display as many tens of thousands of more come to Al-Aqsa Mosque to continue their worship as the people of Gaza stand with pride with their resistance despite the terror bombings of the occupation military. And as the occupation openly expresses its fear of confrontation with the Lebanese resistance, led by Hezbollah that's defeated it multiple times in the past, the prisoners' movement just won a significant victory over a divided Zionist camp, while Qadr Adnan continues his hunger strike for over 2 months behind bars. It's critical for people around the world to come together to defend Al-Aqsa, to defend Al-Quds, and to defend Palestine from the river to the sea from the colonialist onslaught. The imperialist powers, despite some words of condemnation, continue to practice a policy of strategic alliance with the Zionist regime. They continue to sell weapons to the occupation and buy its weapons, battle-tested on Palestinians, Lebanese, and Syrians. The occupation weapons factories continue to produce their machines of death, while corporations profit from their ties with the occupation. Now is the time to make clear that this is unacceptable and that the people of the world stand with Palestine and Palestinian people to bring this injustice over 75 years to an end, toward the liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea. We urge you to join the events and actions below in your city to defend Al-Aqsa. Yeah, please do that. And from The Intercept, Israeli settlers move on let me rephrase that. Zionist entity occupiers move on the holiest site in Al-Quds, sending off a new crisis. Emboldened by Benjamin Netanyahu's government, religious ideologues attacked one of the few spots of Palestinian control in the city. Recent scenes of Zionist security forces beating Palestinians inside Al-Quds Al-Aqsa Mosque have put the Middle East on the brink of a major conflict yet again. In response to Zionist raids on the site, videos which inflamed the region and generated international condemnation, Palestinian militant factions in the Gaza Strip and Lebanon fired rocket barrages at Zionist territory. The fusillade from Lebanon was the largest since the 2006 Zionist invasion of that country. Following Thursday's missile attacks, the Zionist government struck back, bombing targets in both Gaza and Lebanon and announcing a new military operation codenamed Strong Hand. The conflict may seem like just another turn in an endless cycle of violence, but its proximate cause reflects a novel crisis, if only for its depth, the increased radicalization of the Zionist occupying movement and its political patronage by the Netanyahu government. In recent weeks, Zionist occupier groups issued calls to conduct an animal sacrifice at the site of Al-Aqsa, the Temple Mount it's stone to Jews. Understanding the implications of such an act requires some historical background. The site that presently hosts the Al-Aqsa Mosque was once home to the temple that was the center of the ancient Jewish religion and was demolished following a failed revolt against the Roman Empire nearly 2 millennia ago. Centuries later, after the Roman and Persians lost control of the region, the mosque that stands there was constructed by conquering Arabs. Today, some Jewish extremists in Israel, or in the Zionist entity, seek to reassert control over the site and rebuild the temple anew, demolishing the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam, in the process. The threat, however arcane it may seem or sound to secular ears, has driven tensions on the site for decades. When British rule in Palestine ended in 1947, the holy sites were supposed to be shared as part of an internationalized Al-Quds. After the 1948 war that accompanied the founding of the Zionist entity, however, the city was split between Jewish Zionists in the west and Jordanian control in East Al-Quds, including over the old city. The Zionist government took control of the site following 1967's Six-Day War with its Arab neighbors. Since then, the Zionists have overseen a fragile status quo wherein it controls the city of Al-Quds, yet allows Palestinians to maintain a limited degree of sovereignty over Al-Aqsa itself. This arrangement has come under pressure in recent years. Palestinians have alleged that the Zionists have plans to assert direct control over the site. The annual observance of Ramadan has become a regular scene of violence at Al-Aqsa as Zionist security forces routinely raid the site to evict Palestinians, often using gratuitous violence in the process. The tensions have burst to the fore yet again this year. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that his government has no plans to change the status quo at Al-Aqsa, yet his government includes leaders from some of the most extreme occupier groups in the Zionist entity. Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, the National Security and Finance Minister, respectively, are members of settler movements who pursue a radical religious agenda. Both men have been on the vanguard of demanding changes in the delicate arrangements that currently govern Al-Aqsa. The presence of such figures in the government appears to have emboldened the extremists. Several occupiers in recent days were arrested by Zionist police in Jerusalem on suspicion of bringing livestock to the site in order to conduct a sacrifice there, even though most mainstream Jewish groups oppose efforts to reestablish the temple that this politically ascendant fringe has, since Netanyahu brought its adherents into his government, gained more legitimacy and confidence than at any time in history. In response to the threats by settlers to conduct an animal sacrifice at Al-Aqsa, an act that would be considered equal parts desecration and threat, Palestinians have been holding nightly prayer vigils inside the mosque. The purpose of these vigils is in part to commemorate Ramadan and partly to defend against what many view as a prelude to the later destruction of the mosque that stands there. Nighttime prayer vigils are common during Ramadan, and the attack on worshippers by Zionist security forces wielding batons and tear gas, documented by Palestinians themselves in harrowing cell phone footage, has generated widespread anger. During the day, Zionist police were again videoed appearing to gratuitously push Muslims worshipping outdoors off their prayer rugs. That evening, the Zionist police raids came again to the doorstep of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Although the site has a religious value, it's also a nationalistic symbol to both Zionists and Palestinians. For the latter, it also represents one of the few pieces of Al-Quds that they can still call their own. Palestinians also have very earthly reasons to fear even limited changes to the status quo. The political commentator Matthew Petty recently wrote about the subject. Al-Aqsa is one of the few Arab-run public places in the old city of Al-Quds, an island of Palestinian sovereignty in a sea of Zionist annexed territory. It remains to be seen how far the current military escalation will continue. The Netanyahu government's been embattled by domestic protests in recent weeks and may benefit from the distraction of a foreign war, yet a large conflict with Palestinian groups that generate unintended consequences, including drawing in more powerful actors like the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah, would risk raising the tempo of the conflict between or beyond a point where the Zionist government can retain control. The Second Intifada was triggered by a visit by right-wing extremist politician Ariel Sharon to the Temple Mount, as it's called, so-called Temple Mount. The violence ramps up in the region. It seems as though the Zionist government has once again tripped over an issue that's been a red line in the region for decades. The consequences this time could be more dire than in years. While Zionist governments have occasionally sought out of prudence to police the most extreme members of the settler investment, this time the sound's coming from inside the house. Jordanian people protest in support of Al-Aqsa. This is from daysofpalestine.ps. Dozens of Jordanian people took to the streets to protest against the Zionist attacks on Al-Aqsa Mosque on Friday. The rally, organized in front of the Al-Husseini Grand Mosque, showed great solidarity with the Palestinian resistance in the Gaza Strip, West Bank, and the 1948 occupied lands. Participants expressed their support of Al-Aqsa Mosque in the light of the fierce attack it's being subjected to by Israeli occupation forces and settlers. In addition, protests renewed calls on the Jordanian government to expel the Zionist ambassador to Jordan in response to the recent violations in the West Bank and Jerusalem, or Al-Quds. Jordanian activists routinely organize protests and rallies in support of the Palestinian people and to protest against Zionist crimes and human rights violations. Pro-democracy protest rally in Sudan as army deals stalls. Sudanese protesters took part in a rally against military rule on the anniversary of previous popular uprisings in Khartoum, Sudan, Thursday, April 6. The demonstrations came on the day that the country's military leaders who came to power in a coup in October 2021 were meant to sign an agreement with pro-democracy groups that would lead to the appointment of a civilian government. Many in the country's protest movement see the deal as favoring military powers. And watch this space. Remember, your engagement through a like, a share, and a sub will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. Houthis agree to restore UN brokered truce, negotiate with opponents. Al-Aqsa. The Houthis have agreed to restore a lapsed UN brokered ceasefire in Yemen for 6 months, discuss the exchange of all the prisoners they hold, and engage in direct negotiations with the Yemeni government officials and local media said on Thursday. In return, the Houthis will get salary payments for several servants in areas they control, and an easing of restrictions on Sana'a Airport and Hodeidah Port. Saudi officials informed Yemen's Presidential Leadership Council in Riyadh that in addition to the truce and prisoner swap, the Houthis agreed during direct talks to negotiate with the Yemeni government for 6 months under the auspices of the UN and discuss a 2-year transitional period to Yemeni government officials told Arab News. The council, chaired by Rashad Al-Alimi, had convened in Riyadh to discuss how to respond to the latest peace proposals and met Saudi Defense Minister Prince Khaled bin Salman on Wednesday. The two officials said council members would be prepared to engage in direct talks with the Houthis if it could result in a comprehensive peace agreement that ends the conflict. The council also asked for assurances the Houthis would adhere to the terms of the agreements. In an unprecedented and surprising reversal, the Houthis, who have long rejected peace overtures, also agreed to halt attacks on oil infrastructure in government-controlled regions, open all highways in Yemen's provinces, and end their siege of Taiz. Based on their negotiations with Houthi representatives, Saudi officials have developed strategies for achieving a compromise between the warring sides that results in a peace agreement in Yemen. There are Saudi ideas for a UN-led initiative. A Yemeni government official who spoke on the condition of anonymity because he was not authorized to brief reporters told Arab News. This is a lengthy peace plan centered on proclaiming a suspension of hostilities and all military activities, then establishing trust, then forming technical committees and opening all ports, then direct negotiation leading to formation and a transitional period. The official added that the Saudis would deliver the Presidential Leadership Council's response to the Houthis. A previous ceasefire deal broke down in October when the two sides failed to reach an agreement on an extension. Al-Masdar Online, a Yemeni news site, reported that the Houthis have demanded that Arab coalition leaves Yemen within a year of an agreement taking effect, and promised to allow the swift deployment of UN salvage teams to the Safar, a derelict oil storage vessel. It's been moored in the Red Sea off the coast of Yemen since the conflict in the country began, with little or no maintenance, sparking growing fears of a devastating oil spill. Yemeni analysts ascribed the surprising Houthi U-turn to the recent reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Iran, as well as the militia's inability to achieve military gains on the ground. The Houthis are fearful about losing Iran's assistance. Ali al-Faqih, the editor of Al-Masdar Online, told Arab News, one of Iran's commitments under its deal with Saudi Arabia is to halt its projects in the area, and the Houthis are one of its arms. He added that another factor that had influenced the Houthi rush to peace was the desire to regroup and negotiate deals with regional partners after failing to defeat their opponents militarily. The Houthis have reached a point where they cannot accomplish more than they have in the past, and if Iranian help ends, they'll be exposed and lose a lot of ground, al-Faqih says. From Al Arabiya News, Saudi Omani delegation to hold ceasefire talks with Houthis in Yemen, Sana'a sources. A Saudi Omani delegation is planning to travel Yemen's capital Sana'a next week to hash out a permanent ceasefire deal with Houthi officials and in the country's 8-year conflict, two sources involved in the talks said. If an agreement's reached, Yemen's warring parties can announce an agreement before Islam's Eid al-Fitr holiday starting April 20th, the source said. The discussions are focused on a full reopening of Yemen's port and airports, payment of wages of public servants, a rebuilding process, and a political transition, they added. In an additional sign of progress, the Arab coalition lifted 8-year-old restrictions on imports headed for Yemen's southern ports, the internationally recognized government said. This follows the easing of restrictions in February on commercial goods entering the Houthi-held western port of Hodeidah, the country's main seaport. The Yemeni government said on Thursday that commercial ships would be allowed to dock directly in southern ports, including Aden, and all goods would be cleared with some exceptions. Abu Bakr Abid, deputy head of Yemen's Chambers of Commerce, told Reuters ships would not have to stop at the Saudi Red Sea port of Jeddah for security checks for the first time since the Arab coalition intervened in Yemen in 2015. Abid said more than 500 types of goods would be allowed back in Yemen through southern ports, including fertilizers and batteries, after they were removed from a list of banned products. Saudi-led coalition lifts imports restrictions in South Yemen. Saudi-backed government says commercial ships will be allowed to dock directly in southern ports, including Aden. A Saudi Arabian-led military coalition has lifted 8-year-old restrictions on imports headed for Yemen's southern ports as moves towards peace continue. The announcement signals progress in peace talks with Houthi rebel group in the north and follows the easing of restrictions on commercial goods entering the Houthi-held western port of Hodeidah, the country's main seaport. It comes as Yemen's warring sides work to reinstate an expired United Nations brokered truce. The Saudi-backed government based in the south said in a statement late on Thursday that the commercial ships would be allowed to dock directly in southern ports, including Aden, and all goods would be cleared with some exceptions. Abu Bakr Adi, deputy head of Yemen's Chamber of Commerce, said ships would not have to stop at the Saudi Red Sea port of Jeddah for security checks for the time since the Saudi-led coalition intervened in Yemen in 2015. Hadid said more than 500 types of goods, including fertilizers and batteries, would be allowed back into Yemen through southern ports after they were removed from a list of banned products. There was no immediate response from the Saudi government. The moves to increase the flow of goods to ports across the country appear to be an indication of progress in direct talks between Saudi Arabia and the aligned Houthi movement, which run in parallel with United Nations peace efforts. The Houthis, who removed the internationally recognized government from the capital Sana'a in late 2014, are de facto authorities in North Yemen and say they're fighting a corrupt system and foreign aggression. The conflict's widely seen in the region as a proxy war between rival Saudi Arabia and Iran. Both nations recently agreed to restore relations severed in 2016 in a move seen as supporting peace efforts in Yemen. I'm going to push back against that because I've watched speeches of the leader of al-Houthi, Badr al-Din, and he is not. I mean, I've heard him attribute Oman's assistance, and maybe it's on purpose, but I haven't heard him mention Iran in the ways that Saudi Arabia is clearly involved. Iran is not clearly involved. The Saudi-Houthi talks are focused on a full reopening of Houthi-controlled ports and Sanaa's airport, the payment of wages for public servants, and a timeline for non-Yemeni forces to exit the country, sources say. The Saudi-led coalition had since 2015 imposed severe restrictions on the flow of goods into import-reliant Yemen, where wars devastated the economy, contributing to what the United Nations has called the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Opposition mounts against formation of Zionist National Guard under far-right minister. Actually, watch this space. Remember, your engagement through a like, a share, and a sub will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.
It is obvious to the most simple-minded that Lokai is of an inferior breed.
The obvious visual evidence, Commissioner, is that he is of the same breed as yourself.
Are you blind, Commander Spock? Oh, look at me.
I thought you scientists were supposed to keep an open mind.
There's a difference between keeping an open mind and believing something because you want it to be true.
Your friend Spock is a logical man.
I find your arguments strewn with gaping defects in logic.
Most illogical reaction. We demonstrated our superior weapons. They should have fled.
You mean they should have respected us?
Of course.
Mr. Spock, respect is a rational process. Did it ever occur to you they might react emotionally? With anger?
Doctor, I'm not responsible for their unpredictability.
You do not think like the others. There are no colors to your patterns of logic. There's only black and white.
Logical, unemotional, completely pragmatic. And we poor, irrational humans whip them in a fair fight. Now you'll find yourself back among us illogical humans again.
Which I find eminently satisfactory, Doctor. For nowhere am I so desperately needed.
Because she feels. I don't. All I know is logic.
Will you try to understand how we feel about our life here? About each other?
Emotions are alien to me. I'm a scientist.
You're gonna leave here without them? Run off on some wild goose chase halfway across the galaxy just because you found a discrepancy in a hydrogen cloud?
Doctor, I am chasing the captain, Lieutenant Uhura, and Ensign Chekhov, not some wild aquatic fowl.
Mr. Spock, you have a remarkably logical and analytical mind.
Thank you. I prefer the concrete, the graspable, the provable.
You'd make a splendid computer, Mr. Spock.
Opposition mounts against formation of Zionist National Guard under far-right minister. Opposition was on Tuesday mounting against the Zionist government's approval for the establishment of a National Guard force under the supervision of the country's controversial far-right security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir. Groups representing 1.7 million Arabs living in the Zionist entity, political opposition figures, and Zionist entity security service chiefs have all expressed concerns over the decision and the possibility of Ben-Gvir taking direct control of the armed force. The moves come in the wake of violent clashes in mixed Jewish-Arab towns in May 2021. On January 23rd, Ben Gvir proposed the setting up of a National Guard to strengthen the Zionist police and border forces, modeled on Zionist border police currently deployed in the West Bank under the supervision of the Zionist Army Command. He suggested the new force could be augmented by additional police and 10,000 combat veteran volunteers. And in March, the minister proposed the National Guard be separated from the IBP and Zionist police force and be supported or subordinated to the Ministry of National Security. Ben Gvir previously discussed the idea of a National Guard with the police chief, Amir Cohen. Strategic Director of the Givat Habiba Institution and political analyst Mohammed Darwish from the town of Iqsal near Nazareth told Arab News that the establishment of a National Guard was part of a far-right political plan to have a paramilitary force funded by the government and backed by the state that could act as a strike unit against Arabs and opponents of the right. He said the majority of the members of this unit will be ideologically affiliated with the religious Zionist Party, and this is the containment of what they call the hilltop youth from the settlers in the West Bank. The Zionist police have been struggling to attract new recruits and is currently short of more than 1,000 police officers, and many Arabs fear Ben Gvir will attract settlers and extreme right-wingers to his National Guard. Sarin Mohammed Jabarin, a media activist, told Arab News that approval for the new force was part of a political deal between Zionist Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Ben Gvir. Zionist political analyst Yoni Ben Menachem said that many security service and political leaders in Zionist Israel Zionist-occupied Palestine were concerned at the prospect of Ben Gvir gaining direct control over an armed force and turning it into a militia. A committee comprising of all the Zionist security agencies will reportedly decide the exact powers of the new National Guard and submit its recommendation within 90 days. Zionist Police Inspector General Yaakov Shabtai and Chief of the General Staff of the Zionist Defense Forces, Herzi Halevi, are both believed to have misgivings about the formation of a National Guard under Ben Gvir's control. Jalal Banah, a political analyst from Kufr Yasif in Galilee, told Arab News that Arabs in Zionist-occupied Palestine already distrusted the Zionist entity's police and feared the establishment of a National Guard, that it would further erode their citizens' rights. Yosef Jabarin, a law professor and former member of the Knesset, told Arab News that the real goal of forming a National Guard was to suppress Arab society and any demonstrations. He said, we see serious dangers from establishing these militias. He added that opponents will do everything in their power to prevent that from happening. There will be a popular reaction if they're formed. From Memo, Zionist police force will disintegrate if National Guard is under Ben Gvir, says Commissioner. Zionist Police Commissioner Kobi Shabtai warned on Tuesday that the proposed National Guard should not be commanded by far-right National Guard Security Minister Itamar Ben Gvir instead of the police commander. This step will lead to the collapse of the police force in addition to harming the security of Zionists, said Shabtai during a public event at Western Galilee College. He indicated that his opposition to the proposed arrangement is no secret and reiterated that the need to keep all law enforcement agencies under one roof. The creation of a National Guard subordinate to Ben Gvir is an unnecessary step that will have a very high price to the point of harming the personal security of the Zionists. On Sunday, the Zionist cabinet voted to approve the establishment of the National Guard, which Ben Gvir demanded should report directly to him. The controversial force is expected to consist of 2,000 officers who will be tasked with tackling national crime and restoring the rule of law when needed. The timeline for the formation of such a force is unclear, although it would likely take months. The powers and duties of the unit and to whom it will be accountable is under discussion by the Zionist authorities, including the security services and government agencies. The decision made will be issued within 90 days. Likud MK Tali Gottlieb has publicly opposed placing the National Guard under Ben Gvir's command. While such a body is necessary, it should not be under the authority of a cabinet minister, she tweeted. A cabinet minister sets sets policy, enacts regulations, prioritizes tasks, ensures an adequate budget, and is responsible for implementing his office's policies, but gives no direct instructions. Zionist Attorney General Gali Baharav Miara warned the government on Sunday that there is a legal impediment to the current version of the proposal and that the police can deal with the challenges they face without a competing body. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu promised Ben-Gvir last week that he would put the issue to a vote in a cabinet meeting in return for the far-right extremists agreeing to put the judicial overhaul proposal on hold. A chorus of former senior police chiefs has warned against the plan, including former police chief Moshe Karadi, who said Ben-Gvir might use force to launch a coup. Similarly, civil rights groups as well as opposition politicians have expressed grave concern over the proposal. They argue that it could politicize police work and undermine the principle of equality in law enforcement. From the cradle, Zionist police chief calls National Guard unnecessary step with steep price. Zionist far-right governments recently approved the formation of a civilian militia to be commanded by Jewish supremacist minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. A civilian militia? Zionist Police Commissioner Kobi Shabtai warned on 4 April that the proposed National Guard should be established under police control rather than commanded by far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, Middle East monitors reported. The step will lead to the collapse of a police force in addition to harming the security of the Zionist entity, said Shabtai. The creation of a National Guard subordinate to Ben-Gvir is an unnecessary step that will have a very high price to the point of harming the personal security of Zionists. The Zionist cabinet voted to approve the establishment of the National Guard earlier this week. This civilian militia will report it directly to Ben-Gvir as concession for agreeing to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's delaying efforts to pass a proposed judicial reform bill. The judicial reform measures, which would give Benjamin Netanyahu's ruling coalition the authority to pick and choose judges, sparked large protests in opposition to the government's plan in recent months. Many Zionists accuse Netanyahu of seeking these reforms to weaken the High Court of Justice, allowing the Prime Minister to give himself immunity from prosecution for corruption charges. The National Guard is expected to consist of 2,000 volunteers responsible for national crime and restoring the rule of law when needed, and is planned to be formed in the coming months. Israel's Attorney General Gali Baharav Miara warned the government on Sunday that an additional policy force was unnecessary and that the proposal to establish a National Guard would face legal hurdles. Several former senior police chiefs have warned against establishing the National Guard, including former police chief Moshe Karadi, who said Ben-Gvir might use control of the Guard to carry out a coup. The Association for Civil Rights and Zionists called the proposed National Guard a private armed militia that will first and foremost act in mixed cities first and foremost against the Arab population. On 26 January, National Security Minister Ben-Gvir called for establishing a National Guard to prepare the country for a new imminent war with Hamas. The Jewish supremacist minister made the statement after the Zionist army massacred 11 Palestinians during a violent raid in Jenin and its refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. And from Al-Mayadeen, Ben-Gvir's private militia, and a clean chit from a Nazi cabinet. Ben-Gvir's message is that if Palestinians protest or defy the occupation, then they have to be dealt with through excessive force, which is utter defiance of internationally agreed standards of proportionality. If there were any doubts regarding the regressive, extremist, and racist orientation of the Netanyahu cabinet in pro-Israel circles around the world, then they should be allayed. The Zionist demagogue Itamar Ben-Gvir and his controversial private militia, dubbed erroneously as the National Guard of Israel, has been given a clean chit by it's a private militia, right? It's a civilian private militia. It's a civilian militia. It's a private civilian militia. It's a PCM. PCM, private civilian militia, has been given a clean chit by the Zionist cabinet. This entails that ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people has been officially endorsed as a state policy, with Ben-Gvir further stating that the private civilian militia will target unrest in Palestinian communities as a blanket reference that a certain nationality and ethnicity is a source of trouble in Zionist Palestine. This constitutes crass racism, state-sponsored terrorism, and evidence of a socially exclusionary agenda. Ben Gvir's private militia, with its offensive orientation, draws parallels with the Afrikaner Weerstandsbeweging, which remains a far-right white supremacist political party in post-apartheid South Africa. Prior to apartheid, the militant wing of the AWB was instrumental in killing members of the occupied black African population on the premise of safeguarding Afrikaner nationalism and creating a Boer Afrikaner Republic as a solely West Asian state. In 2023, Zionist militias are being formed for the purpose of ethnic cleansing and to create a Jewish supremacist state, a Zionist state, that strips Palestinians of their right to existence by specifically targeting the Palestinian population within Zionist-occupied Palestine. Ben Gvir's ensuring that a fascist country, which has long been the aspiration of the Netanyahu coalition, actually materializes at the expense of Palestinian social exclusion. Additionally, the swift endorsement of the militia, which amounts to approximately 2,000 occupation troops working alongside the fascist Israeli police and the occupation forces, underlines the importance placed by the Netanyahu regime on orchestrating a state crackdown against the Palestinians. As per Netanyahu's office, a committee comprising of the Zionist occupation forces would determine the militia's authorities and whether it would be a subordinate to the Zionist police or take orders from Ben Gvir. Should the latter hold true, then all non-Jewish communities living in Zionist-occupied Palestine should brace for a culture of complete impunity from the occupation forces who'd be licensed to carry out arson and extrajudicial killings without any accountability. The Netanyahu government has essentially signed a death warrant for all non-Jewish communities, and particularly Palestinian Muslims. So essentially what happened in Hawara with the occupiers burning things down, they would be completely deputized with this force. A statement from Ben Gvir's office also stated that the militia would deal with nationalistic crime, terror, and threats to state sovereignty without defining what's meant by either of those terms. Ben Gvir's made it clear that Zionists want to depict all Palestinians living in Zionist Palestine, who are quintessentially an occupied population, as terrorists, while ensuring that the occupying force has a justification to undertake crimes against humanity. Any historian or analyst who studied the nature of the Zionist entity would vouch for the fact that the Zionist government mercilessly massacres Palestinians under the garb of self-defense, and the formation of a militia to curb so-called threats to sovereignty is just an excuse for more bloodshed. The truth is that with the state sponsorship of this draconian militia, the status quo will be further solidified, and the proliferation of illegal occupation and undercutting the just struggle for self-determination for the Palestinians. The demagoguery by Ben Gvir is also telling. While speaking to an army radio, the militant stated that the Zionist occupation police, which has already carried out acts of brutality on Palestinians, does not deal exclusively with curbing so-called disturbances for which a militia is needed. His references to pro-Palestinian and legitimate protests in mixed Jewish-Arab areas in the Zionist regime as witnessed during the Gaza War of 2021. Ben Gvir's message is that if Palestinians protest or defy the occupation, then they have to be dealt with through excessive force, which is utter defiance of internationally agreed standards of proportionality. Exclusively on Palestinians also entails an uptick in target killings, unabashed religious and racial profiling, and possible summary executions, which are all sanctioned by the Netanyahu regime. While some may conclude that such endorsements are diversionary tactics to sway public opinion, which has been overwhelmingly negative in Zionist-occupied Palestine over Netanyahu's crackdown on the judiciary, a more plausible explanation is that this plan was inevitable despite anti-proposal murmurs over Ben Gvir's project. An agreement to finance it with $276 million and skimming 1 to 1.5% of the budget from all ministries was eventually reached. This spending, which is aimed at a summary executions, is being largely ignored by the Netanyahu regime as Ben Gvir pushes for establishing a committee that includes representatives from the Prime Minister's office, the Security and Justice Ministries, as well as from the occupation forces. The decision involves participation from all institutions, which underlines its universal appeal in a regime that's adamant about Palestinian elimination. The endorsement also constitutes an embarrassment for all those who vouch for Zionists, including from within. Former Public Security Minister Omar Bar-Lev, for example, stated that the militia will be formed by a controversial minister who lacks understanding and was convicted of supporting a terrorist group called the Koch Party. For a regime that's controversial tools and mechanisms in place such as the Shin Bet, Mossad Riot Occupation Police, and the SWAT formation, this militia marks a new low for Israel. It's clear that Ben Gvir's militia and its endorsement by a Nazi cabinet is a threat to Palestinians as an occupied population. The world should immediately take notice. And watch this space. Your engagement through a like, a share, and a sub will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.
Beam me up, Mr. Spark. Beam me up. Lock on transporters. Beam us up. Beam us up. Quickly. Beam us up home. Beam us up.
Prepare to beam us up, Mr. Scott. Beam us up, Mr. Scott.
Prepare to beam us up. Mr. Scott, prepare to beam us up. Now, Scotty, beam us up. Beam us up. Beam us up. Scotty, beam us up fast. Stand by to beam us up. Scotty, beam me up.
Beam me up. Beam us up now!
Stand by to beam us up.
No need to beam me up, sir. The situation is under control.